My jaw hit the floor when I checked the security feed and saw Carol Albright, the HOA president, lounging practically naked in my private sauna like she'd booked a spa day at the Four Seasons. She wasn't even trying to be subtle, wrapped in a fluffy towel, sipping rose straight from the bottle, cucumber slices over her eyes. She was humming along to my meditation playlist like the cedar walls belonged to her. Then, in a moment of breathtaking audacity, she whispered into her phone, "He'll never know. His place is basically community property." That's when I decided Mrs. Albright needed a lesson in the definition of private, preferably delivered via the pungent aroma of skunk. 3 weeks earlier, I'd been enjoying a quiet evening on my back deck, the exact reason I built this house. I'm Ben Carter, a combat veteran who bought this plot on the edge of Oak Creek Estates specifically to escape their nitpicky HOA rules. My property is legally exempt certified, notarized, and, thanks to a drunken dare, jokingly tattooed on my calf. I built a personal sauna myself, nestled behind a stand of cedars 10 yards from my fence line. It was my sanctuary, a place to manage PTSD and the overwhelming noise of civilian life. That sauna was more than wood and heat. It was where I put myself back together after tours overseas, where the silence could finally drown out the phantom echoes of explosions and the anxiety of crowded places. So, when I spotted Carol Albright prowling my perimeter fence with binoculars and a clipboard, her silhouette cutting through the twilight, I knew trouble was brewing. She'd come after me before. First, it was my amber LED porch lights, which she deemed a violation of aesthetic harmony. I showed her my exemption papers. She left a violation notice in my mailbox anyway, a passive-aggressive paper cut. Then, she badmouthed me at an HOA meeting, calling me a hostile recluse because I skipped her tofu slider barbecue, where she apparently lectured children on proper lawn edging techniques like a drill sergeant. Her most outrageous move was hiring landscapers to trim my ancient live oak, claiming its branches offended the neighborhood skyline under some vague silhouette violation. I threatened legal action, citing the tree's protected status and 150-year history. She backed down, but the smirk she gave me promised she wasn't finished. For the sauna, I went above and beyond. Permits, zoning letters, fire inspections, even a heavy-duty, private property, no entry sign bolted to the door. None of it deterred her. The breaking point came with a motion sensor alert while I was at the grocery store, my cart half filled with coffee and frozen pizza. Expecting a raccoon, I opened the security feed on my phone and froze. There was Carol, wrapped in a towel, tiptoeing into my sauna. She set up a Bluetooth speaker blasting some bizarre new age flute music and uncorked a bottle of rose, reclining on the bench like royalty. "He'll never know," she murmured into her phone, her tone so casual it implied this was a regular occurrence. The realization hit me like a physical blow. This wasn't her first time trespassing. I watched, stunned, as she lounged for a full 40 minutes, her bare feet propped up on the cedar bench, scrolling through her phone. She finally exited, leaving the half-empty bottle behind, and strolled off my property as if she owned it. Rage boiled up not just at the invasion of privacy, but at her sheer entitlement, her assumption that she could claim my refuge as her own personal amenity. I'd survived war zones, dodging actual threats, only to have my sanctuary, my shield against the relentless grip of PTSD, turned into her personal spa. That night, sleep was impossible. I replayed the footage endlessly, her smug grin and flippant community property comment burning in my mind. I needed a response, not a shouting match, not a lawsuit, but something more effective, something humiliating, unforgettable, something that would make her feel the violation she'd inflicted on me. I called Mike, a buddy who runs a wildlife control service and had once removed a family of skunks from under my deck. "Still got those scent diffusers?" I asked, explaining Carol Albright's sauna escapade. He laughed so hard I thought he'd hyperventilate. "You're gonna skunk trap the HOA president?" "No," I clarified. "I'm going to teach her what boundaries smell like." By the end of the week, I had a non-toxic coyote-repelling skunk scent diffuser. Its odor was potent enough to clear a stadium. Testing it briefly in my garage was a serious error in judgment. I had to air the place out for an hour, eyes watering. But it was perfect, mimicked the authentic stench of skunk without causing any actual harm. I discreetly wired the diffuser under the sauna bench, syncing it to a remote trigger on my phone. I upgraded the security cameras with night vision and fine-tuned the motion sensor to ignore animals, detecting only human movement. A new auto-closing mechanism on the door and a reinforced lock would ensure she'd be trapped inside just long enough to fully appreciate her mistake. Then I waited. I banked on her shamelessness, drawing her back like a bug to a porch light. The next morning, predictable as sunrise, a violation notice was taped to my front door. This time, it cited my sauna's private property sign as a visual disturbance, complete with a red-circled photo as if it were evidence in a major crime. I stood there barefoot, coffee mug in hand, utterly livid. She defiles my sanctuary, then dares to fine me for trying to protect it? I crumpled the notice and tossed it in the trash, my resolve solidifying. That evening, I decided to attend the HOA meeting in their musty clubhouse. Not for fun, but to set the stage. Carol, flanked by her usual clique, radiated smugness, her clipboard held like a scepter. During the new business portion, I stood up, tablet in hand. I believe this footage might be relevant to our discussion on property rights and community respect, I announced calmly. I played the video. Carol sneaking onto my property, jimmying the sauna lock. I'd left the old, weaker one on temporarily for this, lounging with her wine and boasting about how my home was community property. The room went silent. Someone audibly choked on their sparkling water. That's taken out of context. Carol stammered, her face turning a blotchy red. I thought it was a shared amenity. A locked sauna, behind a privacy fence, on clearly marked private property? I countered, my voice steady. Her excuses about vague signage and unclear property lines evaporated under the weight of the visual evidence. Walter, a quiet board member who usually snoozed through meetings, suddenly boomed. That looks like trespassing to me, Carol. Carol's main supporter, Diane, shifted uncomfortably in her seat, her usual loyalty clearly wavering. The rest of the board looked visibly shaken and promised to investigate the matter. Carol Albright's credibility was suddenly as shaky as the plastic flamingos on her lawn during a thunderstorm. I returned home and finalized the trap, a tiny camera hidden in a vent, a much stronger lock installed, and the diffuser tested to ensure maximum olfactory impact within seconds. I added a subtle pressure sensor under the bench to confirm her presence before activation, eliminating the chance of accidentally skunking a curious squirrel. 2 days later, the alert pinged on my phone while I was scrambling eggs. There she was, Carol Albright, clad in a fluffy towel and a hideous green face mask, slinking through my cedars. Her slippers flapped against the ground as she nervously scanned for witnesses before slipping into the sauna. She let out an audible sigh of relief, like she'd reached nirvana, then proceeded to set up her wine and cue a playlist ominously titled Zen Vibes. I let her settle in, her oblivious arrogance almost mesmerizing. Then, I hit the trigger. 5 seconds in, she wrinkled her nose. 10 seconds, a frown, sniffing the air cautiously. 15 seconds, she gagged, bolting upright, then started screaming as the concentrated, synthetic skunk stench rapidly filled the small space. The steamy sauna door, slick with condensation, initially stuck. Her towel began to slip as she pounded frantically on the glass, the green goo from her mask oozing down her face like something from a B-horror movie. She finally wrestled the reinforced latch open and burst out like a cannonball, shrieking incoherently, sprinting barefoot across my lawn, a cucumber-smeared, towel-flapping banshee, arms flailing, dignity shredded. My cameras captured everything: front angle, side angle, interior reaction. My neighbor Steve, who was watering his roses, caught her frantic dash on his phone, texting me seconds later, "Dude, better than pay-per-view." Carol, predictably, called 911, ranting about a chemical assault. 2 police officers arrived just as I stepped calmly outside, prepared. She stood trembling in my yard, half wrapped in her towel, reeking of faux skunk, accusing me of trying to poison her. I simply showed the officers the footage, her deliberate trespass, the wine bottle, her relaxing. Right up until the moment she triggered the harmless, but horrifically smelly, diffuser via the pressure plate I'd installed under the bench. One officer bit his lip hard, trying not to laugh. The other cleared his throat pointedly. "Ma'am, you entered private property without permission," he stated flatly. You're lucky it wasn't a real skunk back there. They issued her a formal trespassing warning and advised her to take up any further complaints with the HOA board. She stormed off, towel draped over her head like a disgraced movie star, her pride clearly as battered as her smeared face mask. I'm Ben Carter, 42. I bought this 5-acre plot on the outskirts of Austin seeking peace after 3 combat tours. Raised by a welder and a nurse in small-town Texas, I learned resilience and the importance of precision. But war leaves scars PTSD that ambushes me in crowds, with loud noises, or during unexpected intrusions. My sauna, legally exempt from Oak Creek Estate's HOA oversight, was my lifeline, a cedar-scented cocoon where I could breathe, reset, and finally silence the echoes of chaos. Yet Carol Albright, with her clipboard and suffocating sense of entitlement, had violated it, turning my refuge into her personal playground. By noon the next day, Steve's video, hilariously dubbed Sauna Carol, Steam Scream, had exploded on the neighborhood Facebook group. Within hours, it had racked up over 2 million views on TikTok. Someone auto-tuned her scream into a viral remix, captioning it, "Private property means private," in flashing neon letters over her panicked, goose-streaked face. Local teenagers started reenacting her mad dash near the clubhouse, towels and face masks included. A morning radio show did a skit mocking her claim of needing to go to a detox center. Carol's response was a poorly photocopied flyer, stuffed into mailboxes under the cover of darkness, alleging she was lured into a toxic ambush that caused temporary memory loss and required an expensive neurological cleanse. It was met with widespread ridicule, dismissed as sci-fi nonsense. Even her staunchest ally, Diane, publicly resigned from the HOA board, citing sudden severe cedarwood allergies. I decided it was time to dig deeper. I started talking to neighbors, collecting stories. Walter, the widower, shared how Carol had fined him $100 for a holiday wreath honoring his late wife, deeming it non-compliant festive expression. Linda, 2 doors down, showed me citations for her porch swing making unregulated noise when the wind blew. A young family had been fined $50 because their child's birthday balloons were still tied to their mailbox 25 hours after the party. Mrs. Gable, a retired librarian, was warned about planting unapproved zinnias in her own garden bed. Frank received a $75 penalty because his new mailbox was deemed aesthetically menacing. Each story fueled my resolve. This wasn't just about my sauna anymore. It was about an entire neighborhood suffocating under Carol Albright's petty tyranny. Armed with Linda's famous banana bread and Walter's surprisingly good pot roast, I started rallying support for an emergency HOA meeting, leveraging a little-known bylaw provision allowing residents to call special sessions with enough signatures. Neighbors, emboldened by Carol's viral humiliation, signed on readily, their years of pent-up frustration finally boiling over. The emergency meeting, held in the clubhouse's perpetually stale air, was electric. Carol, wearing a blazer at least 1 size too small, opened with a defensive tirade about misinformation and targeted slander, but her voice lacked its usual commanding tone. Eyes were rolling all over the room. I stood up, holding a thick binder-me dossier. It contained security footage, copies of unjust citations, neighbor testimonies, and Carol's error-riddled cease and desist letter demanding I dismantle my sauna, which had already drawn quiet laughter from the board members who'd received copies. I played the sauna video again, the trespass, the whine, the community property boast. Gasps rippled through the room. Diane sank lower in her seat. Then, the neighbors spoke. Walter, his voice trembling with emotion, read aloud the citation for his wife's memorial wreath. Linda played an audio recording of Carol berating her over the phone about aggressive ivy spotted during a Zoom meeting. The family presented their balloon fine notice, still taped to the deflated birthday gift. Mrs. Gable detailed the absurdity of the zinnia warning. Frank explained the menacing mailbox penalty. The sheer volume of grievances, a flood of minor humiliations endured over years, clearly stunned the board. Even Carol's remaining supporters looked shaken. The vote for her removal as HOA president was swift and unanimous. George, a retired firefighter known for once rescuing a trapped raccoon using only a garden hose and a Pop-Tart, was nominated and elected as the new president on the spot. Carol Albright hurled her clipboard to the floor, hissed something about lawsuits, and stormed out of the clubhouse. Her dramatic exit was punctuated by the heavy thud of the door slamming shut. The room erupted in cheers. Walter clapped, tears welling in his eyes. The fallout was immediate and cathartic. Carol's toxic ambush flyer became a local meme. Her detox claims were mercilessly mocked on the radio. She filed a complaint with the county, calling my sauna a hazardous environmental zone, but my meticulously filed permits, zoning letters, and documentation on the non-toxic nature of the diffuser shut that down quickly. The county inspector, Mr. Davies, reportedly chuckled when closing the file, calling it the most bizarre complaint of the year, surpassed only by someone claiming their neighbor's windshield was hypnotic. Carol's attempt to get a restraining order against me, citing olfactory distress and environmental stimuli, was laughed out of court, with the clerk warning her against filing frivolous claims. A post titled, "The Skunk Avenger of Oak Creek," exploded on Reddit, featuring screenshots of her flyer and cease and desist letter, sparking a nationwide outpouring of HOA horror stories. Online comments hailed me as a suburban revolutionary, urging others to stand up to petty tyrants in their own neighborhoods. She retaliated with a few acts of petty vandalism. Greasy handprints smeared on the sauna window, the lock tampered with, ineffectively, thanks to the upgrade. A rotten tomato splattered against the cedar wall, its decaying stench briefly mingling with the woodsy aroma. I countered by installing motion-activated floodlights, adding a secondary layer of fencing around the sauna area, and rigging a startlingly loud midnight dog bark alarm, sound only. My new hidden camera caught a hooded figure scrambling away frantically one night. After that, her attempts ceased, her energy or perhaps her nerve finally depleted. A few weeks later, her house went on the market. No open house, just a stark for sale sign hammered into her impeccably manicured, regulation height lawn. The irony was as thick as the cedar scent in my now peaceful sauna. At the neighborhood's spring block party, George, the new HOA president, raised a toast to sanity and skunks. Neighbors gifted me a candle labeled Victory Mist, a playful nod to my little trap. Kids raced around with glow sticks, dogs roamed off-leash, and music played well past the old 10 p.m. curfew. There were no citations, no complaints. Mrs. Gable's zinnias bloomed defiantly, Frank's mailbox stood proudly, and Walter hung a beautiful new wreath on his door. Carol Albright moved out under the cover of early morning darkness, her SUV loaded to the brim. Her blinds stayed shut, mail piled up. I sat in my sauna, the cedar-scented peace fully restored. Outside, hammered firmly into the fence near the entrance, was a new sign I'd carved myself, painted in bold red letters. Trespassers will be skunked. The stars gleamed overhead. My sanctuary stood firm, proof that sometimes boundaries not battles are what truly win the war. And a community, once silenced by petty rules, roars when it's finally set free.